Hello, guys. So today I'm going to talk about manifestation potential and the manifestation gap. And it's a hypothesis that I'm working on, and it's going to be super interesting whether you will see it in my life. Either it works perfectly or it doesn't, and it's going to be super interesting. So the idea is the following, that I mentioned this once before, that if you want to manifest something, not necessarily something concrete, but you want to feel a completeness in the experience of what you're having, then, and it's not there, or it's exactly the opposite, it's 90% there, maybe 95% there, it's only 10% there, then it's because you're not vibrating high enough. Your frequency is not high enough. And it does make even logical sense. So I give the very simple example that if you're grumpy, nobody wants to spend time with you. If you're constantly in a good mood, everyone wants to spend time with you. If you are if you're less fearful, you have the guts to try things that you've never tried before, or to be more available than if you weren't. If you stand in the fire because you feel strong, you have more opportunities. If you hide, you have less opportunities. So there is a direct correlation also in this 3D Maya world between high frequency and low frequency. And that also goes together, for example, with certain things like anger, because most people who don't express anger are actually fearful of the result of, if they express that anger, what would result in their environment. Maybe that's something they learned from their parents or how they were raised. So there's a lot of parallels between high frequency and the real 3D Maya world. So, and then of course you have the metaphysical part, that if you are metaphysically high frequency and you have the connection to the higher channels, then you intuitively do the right decisions. And my perfect example was the massages that I did with women. When I had the spiritual awakening and I sat in silence, I received the message to do massages with women, and 2 days later I had my first clients, and I didn't even know where to put them. It just worked. And then on one Sunday I did a small meditation where I said, I'm going to do all sessions from the heart now. It's going to be very pure. And for some reason, metaphysically, I started to have so many calls that I didn't even know where to put them. I didn't even know where to put them on the calendar. It was a lot. Some of the clients, even, I had 5 clients in one day. And that's, if for a 2-hour massage, you can imagine how much that is. So just to give you an example how the high frequency translates to literally also things in the 3D world. But what we want to feel is kind of like the completion of an experience. So something starts, it has a certain intensity to it, and it feels like it wanes again, and then you feel like a completeness of that experience. And oftentimes we have expectations on the world, and the experience gets to, like, say 80%, and then it kind of falls off, and you're like, it just didn't feel like the right thing. And that's because you're not, that's my theory, my working theory, is that you're not vibrating high enough, because you're attracting, basically. There's one thing super interesting that I found out when I was doing massages, is I learned something super interesting, that because I was doing spiritual, I don't want to get into the words in order not to trigger unnecessarily the wrong algorithm here, but basically the massages that I did were intimate and spiritual, okay? And what I noticed is that if I'm tense, if I'm not fully relaxed, if I don't fully open this channel, then the client, she would also not fully open the channel. So you see how the energy that you are in, the energy that you put out, has a direct effect. It has a direct effect on the people around you, for example. And not just the people, the whole environment. So basically, the higher you are in the frequency, the higher the vibration, the more everything around you feels it. Okay, and you are in full control of that, or mostly fully in control. For example, if you do bija mantras like lam, bum, ram, yam, hum, om, mang, you're already moving into a higher frequency just by doing that and not doing anything else, for example, or just resting in silence, or just following your self-love and all of these things. So, if you want to manifest, use everything that happens today as a way to reflect on yourself where you could go higher in your frequency. And you will, over time, you will notice a change. And letting go of certain people and energies is actually also a stepping stone. So imagine, for example, you meet a person, and it doesn't just it let's just say it goes completely wrong, okay? And let's consider that frequency like, I don't know, 200 hertz, okay? Just for visualization. Then you use that frequency, you let that 200 hertz go, you bump yourself up to 300 hertz, and you go with that 300 hertz into the universe again. And the faster you let go of the 200 hertz, meaning you don't worry about this experience and this person, the faster you move up. And this is something absolutely essential to my hypothesis. That because if you cling onto the 200 hertz and be like, why is she seeing it like that? Why is he seeing it like that? Why am I not connecting? Why is it, all of these things? And you can be a phlegmatic and just not care at all. But you can also be like, I really want to grow. I really want to have almost like a mystical experience of life. And you will only have that if you go into high frequency. Otherwise, you will suffer life, and you don't need to suffer life. In high frequency, you never suffer life. The highest frequency ever is pure bliss, like Ramana Maharshi. That's pure bliss, where you basically don't worry about anything. Nothing gets to you, because in effect, nothing can get to you if you understand yourself as pure consciousness. If you see yourself as pure consciousness. So, and now I have a second idea, which relates to the manifestation. So if you compare yourself to others, you're making a huge mistake, because you're trying to be in the same place as someone else, which can't work, because you're in unique vibration, unique astrology, unique cosmology. You're in your unique place. You are not the same person. So you cannot do the same thing as someone else is doing. It just won't work. Then the second thing is, don't assume that you should get, or that it's even good for you to get the same frequency as someone else. So if you have someone who's super successful, let's say, someone like Jeff Bezos or something like that, do not try to imitate that frequency to try to get the same things. It's not even a good thing to try to get that same frequency. What you want is to be a broad spectrum, high-powered, high vibrating frequency that covers all of it, because then you don't have these things where you're like, oh my god, my work is working, but I'm so stressed. I make a lot of money, but I'm so stressed, and my relationships don't work, and my kids hate me. You don't want that. You want to have kind of like almost like a utopian frequency, where you really emanate on a broad spectrum, where everything seems to kind of click and work on a soul plan level. So, and a lot of people make this mistake. So they compare themselves to someone else, then they get depressed because they can't download and access that frequency. So here's the flip side of this. Try instead to be 100% authentic yourself in the highest frequency that is available to you. And that makes all the difference. And see, the thing is, I'm starting to understand it really more and more on a metaphysical and deeper level, that you have a lot of people that are low vibrating on a very narrow bandwidth. And it's not meant condescendingly. It's just an observational fact. So someone, for example, is smoking, drinking alcohol, constantly in negative mood, sometimes maybe even doing drugs, in a downward spiral. So they're in this kind of like very narrow bandwidth frequency that is disharmonic. And today I received a message which I really liked. It was frequency is everything, and then I shortened it to an acronym like FIE. I really like this. Frequency is everything, because literally frequency is everything. So you decide which frequency you are on. And I believe also that, for example, there's so much real life examples of how this works. So, for example, if one raising of frequencies, if you lose all your fears, and what happens if you lose all your fears? You become suddenly extremely flexible in terms of actions. You could, if you want to, you could pack everything up and move to another country if you're completely fearless. And if you look very closely to what's hindering you doing certain things, you will always see it's fear. It's about fear of consequences, fear of possible negative experiences, fear of, whatever. It's almost always fear that limits you from making a decision that moves you to a higher frequency. So being very honest, very self-reflective is the absolutely essential part of moving into a higher frequency. And then you will notice that a lot of things start to click. So for example, if you're in a pond or a lake of bad fish and bad water, and you're fearful to change the water into a different lake, then you will never be in clean water, because you will think it's the only thing that exists. And I'm not a huge believer in forcing yourself to do things which you're fearful of. I think it's much better to look at and sit in silence in vipassana or any kind of like deeper realization where the fear is coming from and releasing the fear. And for that, also, when you sit in silence, affirmations are fantastic. So you can, for example, sit in silence like this, and then in absolute silence, just say to yourself, I allow myself to let go of all my fears now. And you rest in that silence. And you can say it, maybe you can set even a timer, and you can let yourself do that every few minutes. So you can say sit in silence, like meditative silence, or a state of zero effort. And then every few minutes say to yourself, I let myself go of all sadness and fear now. And you will see it will work. These affirmations, these kind of like instructions, they really work. And aside from other techniques which I haven't shared here yet, I'm going to definitely share very powerful healing techniques. Bija Mantras is one of them, but I have many more. And it will be super interesting. So if you're on a similar journey, or you're super interested in raising your frequency, stick with this channel and invite your friends. And also you will see one of the most interesting things about moving onto a higher frequency is you will notice that the people around you change, because that's one of the most dynamic things that we have, especially now with social media, with all the connections that we can make. When you move into a higher frequency, you will start to see you get different type of connections. And then there's, of course, the universal, the manifestation potential, in the sense like if something wants to be manifested at a certain moment in time. And there's something that I definitely want to talk about is, when people seek for romantic partners today, there is kind of like this idea, I want to be more attractive, I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to attract these kind of people. People often don't realize you're not trying to attract the whole world. You're just trying to attract a very, 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 very narrow subset of one person or maybe two or three that you have in your field which are perfect for you, which create high harmony for you, which allow you to be fully in your self-love while being with them. And so you don't need to go into general attraction for everybody to like you. You just need a few set of people that elevate your life, bring you more harmony, and make and increase your joy. And that's also a very important learning, because nowadays everybody thinks that the more people know me, the more fame you have, the better it is. And actually, I believe that if you're in a very specific frequency, which is your own unique, high-powered self-love, high-vibrating energy, you will manifest only very specific things. And in this area, I like the idea of Bashar, who says abundance comes in many forms. So it will come in many different forms. And you must not judge that form. You must not say, this is the form I want, this is the form I don't want. And in reality also, it doesn't make a difference, because as long as you focus on yourself to increase to your vibration, you are going to move through life with awe, I think, with this mystic awe. And I somehow, maybe I'm in an illusion, but I somehow feel that it's already changing for me. I somehow feel it's already changing for me. I'm much more open, but I'm also very authentic. And I feel I'm meeting different set of people, and I feel something is happening. The most important thing for me is not to get attached to the outside, but to always reflect back onto me and be like, okay, how can I move into a higher frequency today? And then look also at the things that sometimes helps as well. By the way, super interesting. If you have an insight, a very interesting insight, like for example, for me, toxic metaframing, understanding toxic metaframing, or dynamics like the container theory that I was speaking about, those downloads only happen when you already have a channel to upwards frequencies. Those insights are proof that you're moving into a high frequency, because you cannot get these downloads unless you're moving into a high frequency. So it's kind of like a mix of things. Of the insights are a doorway to higher frequency. These sadhanas, so spiritual exercises, are a doorway to frequency. But at the same time, the insights also a signal that you're moving into higher frequency. And so and plus, I have to say, I'm really enjoying this. Like, life becomes a little bit like a Disney castle for adults. Instead of worrying about individual situations and worrying about individual roadblocks on the way, you are using it just a mirror on yourself. And if you have enough curiosity, it's like, oh, interesting. Okay, this wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was super close. So there was like a part of that experience which was super interesting, and I've never experienced this before. So, what happens if I now move into a higher frequency? What experience is out there? And then you just let yourself be surprised. Super interesting. Super, super interesting. So, yes, I wanted to make a video today from, instead of concentrating only on anger, and now let's just talk for 2 minutes on anger. Most people don't express their anger because they're fearful of what the outside might react on. So let's say you're angry on someone and you don't express that anger. You're in effect, you're in effect fearful of what someone else might react based on that. And that's not high frequency. High frequency is actually expressing the anger because you're fearless of expressing that anger. Because that anger, if that rage or anger does have a legitimacy to it. It doesn't always if it's imagined, but for example, there was, oh no, I'm not going to give you a personal example, but let's just say in the past I did not express my anger, and I think it stemmed from trying to be harmonious in every situation. But that anger, and I think this is, in many cases, this is the problem. Anger creates disease because it creates constant inflammation. So you need to get that anger out there. Either you need to transform it within yourself by realizing the person is an illusion and what you're angry about you shouldn't be. But some things, it's absolutely legitimate to feel an anger, and those need to be expressed, and those angers, and ideally to the person directly. And it can be, the movie Anger Management. Watch that one. If you don't know the movie Anger Management, watch it. Sometimes it's really good to let it out, especially directly to the person who caused it. And you will feel so free. And you will feel so powerful. And that's higher frequency. Because with spiritual people, there's always the idea, this dogma that you must not be angry, then if something is wrong with you, and so forth. And that's it for now.